folks, welcome to Phoenixville Library. Good to see so many of you here. Show of hands, how many of you were here for either of the first two parts of this series? Only a couple of you? You guys all come from a sorted one, don't you? Yeah, the juicy one, yeah. Those of you who don't know our speaker tonight, Roger Arthur, has a master's degree in American history from Westchester University. Currently teaches American history and government at Bishop Shanahan High School in Downingtown. We're delighted to have him back at the library for, I don't know what number visit this is, but please welcome the sharpest dressed historian in Chester County. Oh, do we want the front lights off, or?
If it's possible.
Yeah.
Probably use everything. I did want to share with you, these brochures are at the top of the steps out here and they're on one of the shelves up there. And this little brochure talks about the Brandywine Valley Civil War Roundtable, of which I am a member. Sometimes people come out to a talk like this because when they talk about history at home, you know, their children suddenly realize that they've got to rearrange their sock drawer, and their eyes start to roll and say, oh, not that again. But the round table is a place that people come, and we meet the first Thursday of every month, which is tonight. I just wanted to tell you that. But there'll be a meeting in November and another one in December and another one in January. We meet September through May, and we talk about the Civil War. In the brochure, it tells you what the programs are going to be about, and they have an annual visit by Charlie Zahm. Charlie Zahm is a troubadour. He's a guitarist, he's a banjo picker, he's a drum player, he's a marvelous singer, and he sings. This year in March, I think he's going to come and sing Stephen Foster songs, which fit right into the era of the Civil War. And it's all aspects of the war and so forth, and it's history with the bark off, and nobody gets bored, and we come, you know, I've been going there for 30 years, so you're welcome to come as my guest and tell them that you know me, and they'll be happy to have you. So if you have an interest, we meet in the municipal building in West Whiteman Township. So if you just go up US 30 and turn left like you're going to Main Street, onto the bypass, and take the first right like you're going to Main Street. It's right across the street from the entrance to the Main Street area there in Exeter. And we're happy to have you come. This is Alexander Hamilton, the Duelist. This is the third of a three-part series. It's based on Ron Chernow's excellent book, Hamilton. And if you came expecting singing and dancing, my dancing days are over and my singing isn't any good anymore. But I'm sure most of you know that Hamilton, you know, the last event in his life was the duel. And the question is, why duel? Why would they do that? To the people of the 18th and early 19th century, when I say early 19th century, I mean all the way up to and including the Civil War, people's honor was very important to them. I don't mean their honesty, I meant their honor. And by that, to demonstrate their honor, they believed that they would be willing to face almost any challenge to defend their honor. And if it wasn't their personal honor that was at risk, it might be the honor of their loved ones, or their community, or in some cases their state. If you were a man without honor, you were a man who was not well regarded by anyone. But if you were a man of honor, you commanded respect wherever you went. And they did it to demonstrate courage. Not courage to trade shots with anybody or fight with swords with anybody, but be willing to risk your life to defend what you believe to be your honor. Sword fights, you know, we see those on television and in the movies and so forth, and you think, boy, those people are really talented. I don't know how many of you were aware that Abraham Lincoln was challenged to a duel during his lifetime. He had written a letter to the editor of one of the papers there in Springfield about the taxes. The state of Illinois had accepted script to pay state taxes, that is, money issued by Illinois banks, you know, redeemable at Illinois banks, and then they changed their mind and said that they would only accept money that was hard money, and hard money was either gold or silver. Well, Lincoln, and a lot of people thought that this was just the state trying to take advantage of them because they didn't have a lot of hard money on the frontier. So he wrote a letter to the editor posing as a widow woman, from a point of view of a widow woman that had been taken advantage of by the tax collector, et cetera, and how this was really putting her in a disadvantageous position, and so forth and so on. And you know, it was really heart-wrenching. And she named the tax collector, whose name was James Shields. Well, Shields was a slight man. He was probably about 5'4" or 5'5", and a Democrat. And he went to the editor of the paper because his honor had been impugned, that he would cheat this widow woman. And, you know, journalists are never supposed to reveal their sources. Well, as soon as he threatened the editor told him everything. So Shields got his seconds to challenge Lincoln to a duel, and they did. And Lincoln, being the challenged party, didn't want to fight a duel, so he said he chose his weapons as cavalry broadswords, which is about a 5-foot weapon that you had to swing with both hands. And he thought that even though he didn't want to fight a duel, if they ever got to the dueling part, he'd at least have the reach on Shields. Because Lincoln, as you know, was quite a tall man. And it was set actually across the river in Missouri because it was against the law to duel in Illinois. Well, they finally got the seconds negotiated and talked them out of it. But they were going to stand on a 12-foot wide plank, 12 feet long, and they would go at each other with cavalry broadswords. And Shields, being 5'5" or 6", and Lincoln being 6'3½", he thought better of it. He didn't think that was such a good idea. So they finally settled the matter amicably. But that's as close as Lincoln ever came to being in a duel.
If Lincoln was the challenger, what was Shields?
Shields was the challenger.
Shields was the challenger.
Yeah, he challenged Lincoln to the duel, which means that
I
because
thought you said Lincoln was the challenger.
No, Lincoln was the challenged, and as the challenged person, he has his choice of weapons. So dueling was not at all uncommon in early America. This is a scene from Othello, Act 3, Scene 3. And I think Shakespeare says it best. He says, through the mouth of Iago, "Who steals my purse steals trash. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of all that enriches him and makes me poor indeed. He who steals my good name steals everything, but he who steals my purse steals trash." As you probably know, Hamilton was born on the island of St. Kitts. On the island of Nevis in the Caribbean. The time of his birth is a little sketchy. It might be 1775, 1755. It might be 1753. It might even be as late as 1756. He went to St. Kitts, and there he worked for a trader, an importer who was, you know, in the West Indies, goods came literally from all over the world to be dispersed to the different colonies and different plantations and so forth throughout the West Indies. And Hamilton, as a young man, had to be able to deal in different weight measurements and in pounds or and different money from different countries, Dutch guilders and French francs and British pounds sterling and Spanish doubloons and so forth.
Where did you say he was born?
The little red dot there on the island of Nevis.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So he had to figure all this out, and he had to do it in his head. And his patron was quite taken with this 12 or 13-year-old lad who could do all this. And he was so impressed with him that he paid to have him come to North America for an education. When Hamilton came to North America for an education, he first went to Boston and then later made his way down to New York City. And he enrolled in the Elizabethtown Academy in New Jersey, which is sort of the 18th century version of a prep school. And it was there at the academy he met Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was the son of Aaron Burr Sr. and the grandson of Jonathan Edwards. If you're not familiar with American 18th century and late 17th century history, Jonathan Edwards was an evangelist and one of the people who was responsible for the first Great Awakening in America. And it was done in the 1730s. The Great Awakening was a revival of Christianity to these frontier bumpkins to teach them about God and honor and how to live a good, clean, and righteous life. And Jonathan Edwards was considered one of the finest ministers, a spellbinding speaker, a real stem one. And both Edwards and his son were president of the College of New Jersey, which is today known as Princeton University. Aaron Burr graduated from the College of New Jersey at 16 years of age, and when the Revolution began, he joined Washington's staff. He thought that he would ride with Washington and it would be glorious and would be interesting, and he found out that staff work was paperwork and grunt work. So less than 6 weeks later, out he went. He didn't want any part of that. Hamilton, after he had gone from the academy in New Jersey, was enrolled at Oxford on the Hudson. Oxford on the Hudson, they called it. It was really King's College. That's when the king was still in charge. Today it's Columbia University. And he enrolled there in 1773, and he came to get his education, and that's where it began. Paid for by his sponsor back in the West Indies. And while he was at King's College, of course, the Revolution boiled up. 1773 was the year of the Boston Tea Party. 74 was the year of the Intolerable Acts, where the British are putting a heavy hand of the tax collector on the colony of Massachusetts Bay. And other colonies thought if they could do it to Massachusetts Bay, they could do it to us just as easily. So the colonies banded together to support Massachusetts Bay in their fight against the oppressive parliamentary taxes. And Hamilton fought his way through the Revolution as part of Washington's staff. And then later he became part of Washington's cabinet. And as it turned out, his department was the largest in Washington's cabinet because he was the Treasury Secretary, which meant that he had to collect the taxes. And if you collect taxes, you have to have tax collectors. Then you have to have tax collecting enforcement to make sure that the tax collectors don't steal the government's money and make sure that the people who pay the taxes don't squirm the government out of what's owed. Question?
Was it Burr or Hamilton that went to Hudson King's College?
Hamilton. Burr went to what is today Princeton. It was the College of New Jersey. It's okay. So, Hamilton, having served in the Revolution, attended the Constitutional Convention for a time, was appointed to Washington as Washington's cabinet as the first Treasury Secretary. Later, became disenthralled with the government and went back to New York where he practiced law. It's also interesting to point out that it was Hamilton's idea, once the Constitution was written and it was being sent to the states for ratification, that he thought that he would write a series of essays explaining to the people what the Constitution was all about, what it meant to do whatever this clause, that article to do. And he wrote a series of essays, and he enrolled James Madison to help him. And the series of essays that Hamilton and Madison wrote together are commonly known as the Federalist Papers. There are 85 of them. 5 of them were written by John Jay. But all the others, most of them were written by Hamilton, and some of them written by Madison. And it was a defense of the Constitution and why the Americas should bind together. Because when you think of it, the 13 original states didn't have a great deal in common. They spoke English, that's true. They were part of English colonies, that's also true. They occupied the east coast of North America, that's also true. But their commonality after that was different. Life in Georgia was significantly different from life in Virginia. Life in Virginia was terribly different from life in Massachusetts. And nobody could get along with New York. Well, I guess nothing's changed very much. Anyway, so they thought of uniting and trying to figure out how to do that. And it was Hamilton and it was Madison who had a plan, and Hamilton who saw Madison's plan and saw real potential to join these 13 individual sort of sovereign states together. And when General Washington left office in 1797, he told America 3 things. Keep your union together, he said. In your union is your strength. Steer clear of sectional political parties. And steer clear of binding foreign entanglements. These European wars, he said, are not our business. They'll only get you into trouble. When General Washington left the government in 1797, the election in 1796 was between Jefferson on the one side and Adams on the other. John Adams prevailed in that first election after Washington. By 1800, however, it was Jefferson who was the vice president and Adams who was the president. But Jefferson, you know, he's got an idea of the government that governs best governs least. He wanted a limited federal government. He didn't like the idea of a strong central government. They'd had a strong central government in England, and it turned out that didn't work very well. But if you read Jefferson and read what Jefferson wrote besides the Declaration of Independence, you'll find out quickly that Jefferson was on both sides or all sides of almost every issue at one time or another. You can prove almost anything you want to prove about early America with Jefferson. So if you're in an argument, just say Jefferson said it, you're probably right about it. Well, in the election of 1800, it's Adams and Jefferson again. And the electors, as you probably know, we don't elect the president. Ask my students who elects the president. And the answer is never we do. It's always the Electoral College. Now, why would they put this conflated, obtuse idea in there to elect the president? Well, the people who wrote the Constitution believed that most voters, and voters goes back to what Jefferson called all men are created equal. He didn't mean all. first thing you have to know is that all men does not mean all. Doesn't mean all men, it certainly doesn't mean any women, doesn't mean any Indians, doesn't mean any black people. It means all white men with property, that's what it meant. But they thought that it was so diverse, the country was so diverse, north and south, and moving west all the time, that they could never keep track of who would make a good national leader. So they devised a representative system, give each state one elector for every member that they have in Congress, one for every representative and one for every senator, so they can have at least 3 per state. And here is an electoral map that shows you the election of 1800, how many electoral votes they had. And the one who received the candidate who received the most electoral votes would be the president, and the one who received the second most electoral votes would be the vice president. That's the way it was with Washington and Adams. That's the way it was with Adams and Jefferson. And in the election of 1800, that's the way they expected it to be. What the people wanted when they devised the Electoral College was a group of friends and neighbors who were trusted by the people who elected them to make the decision on president for them. That's not what they got. What they got was everybody knew the presidential candidates, everybody knew their reputation, and from almost the first day. You can't keep George Washington a secret. You just can't. And everybody knew who he was, and nobody knew who the electors were. If anybody in here is an elector, put your hand up. If anybody knows an elector, put your hand up. We could go up to the King of Prussia Mall and ask that same question, and I'd offer $5 to everybody who could identify any elector and walk away with all my money. Because nobody knows who the electors are. Then and now. In 1800, the results of the election were strong. Adams was a crusty, my way or the highway kind of guy, and a New England Yankee lawyer. Jefferson was easygoing, slow talking, Virginian, and a hero. After all, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Well, he did physically write it out. It wasn't all his idea, so he had a committee to help him. So Jefferson's quite famous and well regarded among the people. Each elector could cast 2 votes in those days. One for president and one for vice president, but they didn't specify if their votes were for president or vice president. They just cast 2 votes. So in the election of 1800, all the Democratic electors cast their 2 votes for Jefferson and Aaron Burr, but didn't differentiate. Aaron Burr was Jefferson's vice presidential nominee. He was his running mate. And in those days, they didn't put them together on the ballot. All the names were on the ballot, but they were all separate. So Aaron Burr, the electors cast all their votes, the Democrats cast all their votes for Jefferson and Burr, but they didn't say which was which. And when they counted the votes, Burr claimed that he had as many electoral votes as Jefferson, and by the terms of the Constitution, he had as much claim to the presidency as Jefferson did. Well, everybody knew that Jefferson was supposed to be the president and Burr was supposed to be the vice president, but Burr's argument was it doesn't say that in the Constitution, and that's not the way that we're tied. Adams has no chance. He's out of the running completely. So they sent the election to the House of Representatives. Now, the Federalists, the schemers in this whole mess, who were identified in the newspapers as Brutus and Cato, who were part of the conspirators who killed Julius Caesar, in case you didn't know that, and then the federal farmer. They thought that they could defeat Jefferson if they supported Burr in this whole thing. So it was politics as usual back in 1800. Hamilton's view of Burr was expressed to Oliver Wolcott, who was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time. And what Hamilton said to Wolcott, it was at a dinner party that he just, you know, that they're standing around having their glass of mead, waiting for dinner to start. And he said to Wolcott, he said about Hamilton, or about Burr, he said, his principles have no other spring than his own aggrandizement. He's in it for the money. That's it. To Gouverneur Morris, Hamilton said, Burr has exorbitant debts and would be susceptible to bribes from foreign governments. And then he went on to say, he said, I could support Jefferson with a clear conscience provided assurances on certain points were given. Maintenance of the present system, that is the present constitutional system. Pay out the public debt, there's an idea. Maintain the Navy and neutrality. Well, neutrality in 1800 meant staying out of the Napoleonic Wars between Britain and France. Jefferson refused to commit to any of that. He might privately say that he favored this or that, but he would never say so publicly. To Federal friends, Hamilton said, by endorsing Burr, they would be signing their own death warrant. Burr apparently was known as a schemer himself. He was a lawyer. He regularly swindled clients. He regularly swindled the court, or tried to. And he just wasn't a very trustworthy fellow in the eyes of many. But he was an effective politician, they thought. And so the election moved to the House of Representatives. As the Constitution says, if you can't get a majority of the electoral votes, you take the top 3 candidates and they go to the House of Representatives. And the House votes, and each state is allowed 1 vote. And in this case, they needed 9 votes to win. After 35 ballots, every ballot showed Jefferson with 8 votes and Burr with 6 and 2 blanks. The Speaker of the House at the time was a man named Theodore Sedgwick. He's frustrated. He doesn't know what to do. He sees no way out of what looks to him to be a deadlock. And then finally, the Richmond Examiner published this broadside. And the date of the broadside is on there someplace. By express from the city of Washington to the editor of the Times. This moment of election is decided. Morris from Vermont absented himself so that Vermont was for Jefferson. 4 members of from Maryland who had voted for Burr put in blank tickets. The result then was 10 for Jefferson. I hope you will not have the cannon out to announce this.
You will have the cannon.
You will have the cannon out. And then it says, this was the second ballot today. Bayard's appointment, ambassador to France. Today, 2 o'clock, office of the Examiner. And you'll notice that the S's look like F's. Burr thought that because of Hamilton's discussions with Morris and Wolcott and the others, that he had somehow used his influence to throw the election to Jefferson. Privately, Burr, or Hamilton in his own mind, thought, I don't particularly like Jefferson, I don't particularly agree with anything that he says, but better Jefferson than Burr. At least we can trust Jefferson most of the time. Can't trust Burr any of the time. In 1801, Hamilton's son Philip had gotten himself involved in a duel situation. He was in an ale house with some people, and there were some soldiers in there and some young women of various reputation, and things sort of got out of hand, and the pushing and the shoving started, and young Hamilton, Philip Hamilton, tried to defend one of the young ladies and was taken advantage of by one of the soldiers, and the pushing and the shoving and so forth, and finally the duel resulted. And Hamilton told his son, he said, "You don't need to do this." And Philip said, "Father, if I've been challenged to the duel, I've got to do this. I cannot just turn my back and walk away. Everyone will say that I'm a coward." And his father said, "I don't mean that you don't have to go through with the duel. I mean you don't have to kill anyone. You could participate in the duel and throw your shot away." And what that means is that when the signal is given to fire, you don't aim at the other party, you just point your weapon to the ground and squeeze the trigger, and they'll know that you fired and you were willing to stand there and take fire yourself, but you didn't intend to kill anyone. And that's what his father tried to get Philip to do. We don't all know the conversations that took place between father and son before the duel. What we do know is that when the duel took place, Philip did exactly what his father suggested that he do. He threw a shot away. And the soldier did not. And he shot and killed Philip. And this is a scene from the play. If you've seen the musical, then you probably know what the music goes about. You know, there's Hamilton and his mother, you know, trying to comfort their dying son. That was in 1801. And in many ways, Alexander Hamilton never quite recovered from the loss of his son. He and his wife had 6, 7 children, so it isn't, you know, it isn't like that was his own son, the only boy he had. He had others, but, you know, anytime you lose a close member of your family like that, I think it wrenches your heart. Why would they do that? Well, they did it to defend their honor. Hamilton was going to show that he was a man of courage. He'd gone through the Revolution. He'd borne the brunt of battle. He led the charge, a bayonet charge against Redoubt No. 10 at Yorktown, which defeated Cornwallis's army. So he's a war hero, and a proven war hero. And everybody knew that. But he's not going to be intimidated by this now scoundrel of a lawyer. Burr, on the other hand, he's got a sullied reputation. Because of the 1800 election, people don't trust him. I'm not sure how many of them trusted him before that. He's ostracized by the Democratic Republicans, which means his chance at any kind of national office, even though he is Vice President of the United States, his chance of any other national office is not really very well. And he thought that he could rebuild his reputation if he were elected governor of New York. Hamilton, on the other side, was a Federalist. He was a Federalist first, last, and always. And his acceptance, the Federalist Party itself began to decline after John Adams' administration, because a lot of the Western farmers and the westward movement that was taking place and pushing west and so forth, those people supported the Republican idea of Thomas Jefferson, the Republican farmer on his Republican land, and that's Republican with a small r. Sir?
And regarding throwing one's shot away, when did Patrick Henry shout out, "Give me liberty or give me death"?
March 1774, 1775.
1775. And would that have anything to do with throwing your shot away?
No. That was an inspiring speech to get the Virginians to join their countrymen in Massachusetts. The next gale that blows from the north will bring the resounding sound of clashing arms. The enemy is already in the field, he said.
What date was it again?
March 1775. The Federalist Party is on its way out. Hamilton is depressed because of the loss of his son. He built a mansion in the country. Well, the country was up in Harlem on Manhattan Island. It's still there today. That's not the original site. It's been moved, but that's the Grange. Those two guys sitting there on the wall, I don't think either one of them were related to Hamilton. And they had no color photography in the 18th and 19th century. This is what the country looked like by early 1804, late 1803. As you're probably aware, the United States spent money for Louisiana. Louisiana was the drainage of the western half of the Mississippi Basin, included the Red River and the Missouri River, all the way to the headwaters in the Rocky Mountains. There are two versions of the Louisiana Purchase. One is that the United States desperately needed the port of New Orleans so that we could protect our goods that were being sent and shipped all over the world. And the whole western side of what was then the United States, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and so on, used the Ohio and the Mississippi, the Tennessee and the Cumberland, to join to the Mississippi and ship their goods to market to New Orleans. As long as it was in the hands of a foreign power, we thought we were at economic risk. So in 1802, Thomas Jefferson sent an emissary, James Monroe, to France to buy the port of New Orleans for about $7 million. When he got there, he found out that the French had defeated the Spanish, who had claim to the Louisiana country, and now the French picked up the Spanish claim, and they too now have claim to the Louisiana country. So Napoleon and Monroe talked to each other and negotiated, and Napoleon said, well, if you're willing to pay $7 million for New Orleans, I'll just give you the whole thing for 15. When word came back to America that Napoleon was willing to sell all this for 2 cents an acre, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the President or Congress power to acquire land, either by purchase or conquest. It's just not in there. And Jefferson believes that the government that governs best governs least. Deliver the mail, defend the shore, leave me alone. So there's nothing in there. He wants the government to do only those things necessary, but he thought this was necessary, that we buy this. So he persuaded Congress to come up with the $15 million, and we paid that to Napoleon and took title to Louisiana. That's one story. The other story is that Napoleon is up to his armpits in the Napoleonic Wars with Britain and Prussia and the others, and desperately need money to fund armies. Soldiers can't eat air. They have to be fed, and the horses have to be fed, and ammunition isn't cheap, and powder and shot and so on, and he desperately needed money. There are people in America who support the British in this event, including most of the Federalists. Jefferson, on the other hand, was a Francophile. And he saw Louisiana as an excuse to give his friend Napoleon $15 million to help his war effort. Did we need to buy Louisiana? The French cannot defend it. No nation in this world can have any more land than it's able or willing to defend. The French can't defend that land. There's 3,500 miles of ocean in the Royal Navy between France and Louisiana. Not a chance he's going to send an army over here to fight for Louisiana. And besides, we're already here, and we were already pushing into it. As early as 1802, Jefferson had planned an expedition into the Louisiana Territory to explore the Missouri to the headwaters. Well, anyway, you can have either story you want. It doesn't make any difference to me, and I'm sure it doesn't make any difference to those people either. But we bought Louisiana, and the idea that moving westward was a Republican idea, and that the people in the West would support a Republican government, and that's Republican with a small r. A small yeoman farmer and family living on the frontier, taking care of themselves, managing their own affairs. Federal aid in those days was, here's an axe, go west. Timothy Pickering said the new West is going to be Republican. And if it does, then we can just separate the country, throw away those New England boneheads, and we need New York to join us, and we can form a country of our own. We don't even need those guys. So he's going to support Burr for governor of New York, hoping that Burr will join his plan to separate the West and become a brand new country. Hamilton is a Federalist, and he's first a Constitutionalist, and because he's a Constitutionalist, he's a Unionist. If there's anybody that buys into General Washington's admonition to keep your Union together, it's Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was Washington's protege. The Federalists met in an attempt to back Burr for governor of New York and help New England secede. Hamilton said, if the Federalists intend to destroy the Constitution and break up the Union and bury themselves in the ruins, Burr is their best choice. Burr is most adroit, able, daring, ambitious, and unscrupulous Jacobin in America, Hamilton said. When the election took place in April of 1804, Aaron Burr, the Democratic Republican, got 22,139 votes. Morgan Lewis, the Democratic Republican, who was friends with the existing governor, got 30,829 votes. So it's going to be Morgan Lewis who's the new governor of New York. In an Albany newspaper, Dr. Charles Cooper declared, Hamilton, regarding Burr, Hamilton said in regard to Burr, to be a most dangerous man who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. Cooper cited that Hamilton had expressed still more despicable opinions of Burr, and he published that in a paper in Albany in April of 1804. Burr read that. Other people read it and brought it to Burr's attention. Burr cannot allow his reputation to be besmirched in any such way, so he engaged the services of his good friend William Van Ness and delivered this note on Friday, June 22nd, 1804, to General Hamilton. And what it said, in essence, was the note cited the article that Dr. Cooper had referenced, statements allegedly made by Hamilton about Burr at a dinner at Judge John Taylor's house earlier in the year. That was February of 1804. And Burr demanded an explanation. If no satisfactory explanation was forthcoming or an apology offered, the next step was the duel. When the word came back to Hamilton, he had gotten the note from Burr, and Van Ness wanted Hamilton to respond with an explanation. Hamilton said, I have nothing to explain or apologize for. Besides, it's such a vague reference about an event that took place months ago. The note came in June, the party was in February, and the newspaper article was in April. It says, I'm not going to do any of that. And if that's not satisfactory, he, meaning Burr, must pursue a course that he should deem most proper. And Hamilton went on about his business. Hamilton called Burr's letter a rude and offensive and unanswerable. And he mentioned that to his good friend, Judge Nathaniel Pendleton. And Pendleton related Hamilton's response back to Burr. You'll notice that Burr and Hamilton didn't talk to each other. Hamilton talks to Pendleton, and Pendleton talks to Van Ness, and Van Ness talks to Burr, and back and forth in that way. It was not considered at all proper for the two in the argument to confront each other except on the dueling ground. Hamilton's letter to Burr. He sent Burr a new letter in which he described Burr's letter as indecorous and improper. The seconds, Van Ness and Pendleton arranged a meeting on the Field of Honor for July 11th at 7 a.m. in Weehawken, New Jersey. Allowed Hamilton, this is done to allow Hamilton to conclude some pressing business for some of his clients because he was a practicing lawyer in Manhattan. The dueling ground was across the river at Weehawken, New Jersey. It's held in Jersey because it's illegal to duel in New York. It's illegal to duel in New Jersey too. But they're not citizens of Jersey, they're citizens of New York. Hamilton said that he would meet Burr but did not intend to shoot at him. He would purposefully aim wide to satisfy his honor, but not to hurt or kill. So he too intends to throw away a shot. And let it be known that he intended to do that. Told his family that, told Pendleton that, and told others that. These are the actual pistols that were used. The pistols are brass, smooth bore, muzzle loaded, and the ball about 1 ounce each. They were manufactured by the Wogden Company in London. They had belonged to a good friend of Hamilton's. And those were the same pistols that Philip had used in his duel. I don't know how much you know about muzzle-loading weapons, ma'am.
And where are they located?
They're in a museum
Which one?
whose address I cannot read even with my glasses on. But I'll bet if you write to the Hamilton Society in New York or go on the internet, I'm sure they're available for viewing. I don't know how much you know about muzzle-loading weapons. These pistols, the barrels would have to be cleaned out, swabbed out, nice and clean. They put in a measure of powder. Then they would take a round ball, wrap it in a linen patch, push it down the barrel, ram it down with a ramrod until it got to the breech of the barrel. Then they would put a little powder in the pan, pull the hammer back to half cock, open the striker, and there's a little groove in there, and they would put powder in that little groove and then pull the striker down. And they would keep the pistol at half cock, and it wouldn't fire when it was at half cock. People say they went off half cock meant that they couldn't fire anything, couldn't shoot their guns. And if the gun went off early and set off the powder in the pan, but didn't go through the little hole into the breech of the weapon and ignite the powder behind the ball, they would just call that a flash in the pan, and they would have to put more powder in. So that's how they operate. And it's a one-shot program, and it's a smooth bore weapon, and the ball is round, and the only thing holding it in the barrel is that little patch of fabric around the bullet. And its accuracy, if you fired at the wall, you could hit the wall. Could you hit anything else? Could you aim the gun and hit it? Well, you could point it in the general direction of. But it was not a particularly accurate weapon because as the ball moves down the barrel, it jiggles like that, so there's no way to control how it comes out of the barrel. It's not until we have rifled barrels that you're able to control the direction of the projectile coming out of the muzzle. Weehawken, as you probably know, is on the waterfront of New Jersey, and the land on which the duel was to take place was owned by a wealthy farmer in New Jersey whose land was used often for duels. And he had a lawn that came all the way out almost to the river, and there were trees and so forth, and then it terraced down, and there was a little ledge there, probably about as wide from this table to that first step there, a ledge of land. And people who were on that ledge of land could not be seen from the farmer above. And that's why they chose it. So the farmer had no knowledge that there was anybody on his land. And they had access to the land from below at the river. They could bring their boats to the river, they could climb up and they'd be on the ledge, and they're about 15 feet above the water line. So they're in a secluded place. I mean, it's out in the open, but there's nobody, there are not gonna be any witnesses that aren't invited. And even the doctor who went to these duels always stayed in the boat. So if he were called by any authorities, did you know anything was going on, he could say, I didn't see anything. And he didn't, he was in the boat. Could he see? No. Could he hear? Well, you know, it's New York, what are you gonna do? If you cross over, it's Brereton Avenue, it's just on the other side of the Hudson. It was not a back-to-back duel you've seen on TV and in the movies. Everybody stands back-to-back, they got their gun like that, they count to 10, turn and fire. It's not the way it works. They are about 15 paces apart. 15 paces, that's probably 40 feet. And hitting anything with a gun like that at 40 feet has got to be an amazing shot to begin with. I mean, hitting anything besides the air, because they're not particularly accurate weapons. But they stood and they faced each other when the referee says ready, you can turn and raise your gun, or you can turn, but you don't have to raise your gun. When he drops his handkerchief, that's a signal to fire, and you can fire or not as you choose. So you see here that they're pointing their weapons at each other. This is not a photograph, by the way. There are no cameras in 1804. This is a drawing. This is an artist's rendering of what they thought it might have looked like, because the people who were there were sworn to secrecy. Because this is a crime. It's a crime in Jersey to do it in Jersey, and it's a crime in New York to think about doing it. Hamilton held his shot wide and he fired at about head high, but it hit the tree branch behind Burr. And I mean, it was a good 10 feet off the mark. So Burr knew that Hamilton had discharged his weapon and had not tried to kill him. Burr then leveled his weapon at Hamilton and shot him. That he intended to shoot him. Now, whether he intended to kill him or not is another matter. But you can see here from this artist's rendering that Hamilton is hit hard in the right side, just above the belt line. You know, came in. That had to be quite painful to be shot there. He's immediately tended to by the seconds who send for the doctor, who came up from the boat. And you see here a little level piece of land that they were on. The doctor came up, he looked at the wound, he didn't know if it was mortal or not. And they, in the early part of the 19th century, they couldn't tell. They just couldn't tell. You can't say, well, this is going to kill you, that, you know. My thinking is anytime you get shot with anything, there's a pretty good chance you can get killed. But, so the doctors are going to do what they can for him. They get him down into the boat. They row him across the river. They take him home, and they put him in bed. And they're going to treat him as well as they can. They're going to bandage the wound if they can. I don't know that the bullet was lodged in Hamilton at all, but it did serious damage to him. I'm sure it didn't do his liver any good and probably ripped open a kidney. So he's going to be there, and people are coming, and they, you know, they're pretty sad that he's severely wounded. And the next day he passed on. And this monument, which is there today, is in the churchyard of Trinity Church at the end of Wall Street. And this is what it says up close. It says, Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, a corporation of Trinity Church, has erected this monument in testimony of their respect for the patriot of incorruptible integrity, the soldier of proved valor, the statesman of consummated wisdom, whose talents and virtues will be admired, a grateful posterity long after this marvel shall have molded into dust. He died July 12, 1804, at age 47. Hamilton's legacy. He gave us a sound federal government. He gave us a central bank. He gave us a funded debt. He wanted to combine all the state debts from the Revolution and pay them out through the federal government to establish the federal government's credit rating, and the United States government has never missed paying its debts. He established for us a high credit rating. He established a workable tax system. He established the Customs Service, and to make sure that people didn't squeeze the government out of its money, he established the Coast Guard, who was originally set up as revenue cutters to chase down people who were trying to smuggle things into the country. And he was an early supporter of the United States Navy. Ma'am.
A couple questions. So at Trinity Church, that's just a monument? He's not buried there?
He is buried there.
He is?
That's
Okay,
right.
because it just says this monument erected. It doesn't say,
Well, his
here
grave's there.
lies the remains of, or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm sure if you ask the sexton at Trinity Church, they can point it out to you.
Okay, and the other question is, in a duel, do they each only get one shot?
It's a single-shot weapon.
Okay, so they don't reload and shoot again if they miss or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
And if both of them had thrown away their shot or missed, they would have satisfied the requirements of being able to defend their honor. The idea was not to kill anybody. The idea was that you're willing to risk your life to defend your good name. And once you've done that, game's over.
Okay, and why didn't they shoot simultaneously instead of Burr waiting until after Hamilton shot?
I can't answer that. I don't know. Burr never got over it. His reputation was ruined. He was considered by most Americans to be the murderer of Hamilton, because Hamilton had already thrown away his shot and Burr shot him dead. Now, did Burr have the right to do that? If you think of the Code Duello, he did.
Mhm.
But everybody thought he was a rascal.
Okay, and are you familiar with the Aaron Burr House in New Hope, and what is that house about?
You mean the one up that was his headquarters during the Revolution?
Is that what it was,
I
in
think
New
so.
Hope?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm an Ohio boy. I don't know where New Hope is.
You don't?
No.
No, aren't you from the area? You work
No,
at?
I'm an Ohio boy.
Okay, well, you work at Bishop Shanahan, you
Yeah, I
teach
do.
there?
I do.
That's a long commute, though.
I don't live in Ohio. But I used to. Spent a lot of time in Ohio.
Where?
I was born and raised in Dayton, went to school at Bowling Green,
Okay.
lived in Cincinnati for years, where I met my wife. Then we moved back to Dayton.
Great.
Sir?
You said dueling was illegal
Yeah.
in all 50, or all the states, or where?
I assume all the states, I'm not familiar. I think in the South it was, it was probably considered illegal, but they gave a wink and a nod to it. That's why they went to Jersey. Because it was illegal in New York. It was illegal in Jersey too, but unless the authorities in Jersey knew that it was going to take place there, they can't stop it. And by the time they got down there, it would be over and everybody would stand around and say, I don't know anything.
How was that different from New York?
Well, first it's more secluded, and you can't just do it on the streets of Manhattan like today.
arrested Burr after the fact though for murder?
No, because there's no proof.
Yeah, there's no witnesses.
He's not gonna say I did it, and there, nobody's gonna testify against him.
Mm.
And who's gonna do the arresting anyway? The New York authorities, he wasn't killed in New York. He died in New York, but he wasn't wounded there. And the New Jersey authorities, they didn't know that the duel was taking place. You know, are there witnesses who are willing to testify? No. But everybody knew, regardless of what the authorities were able to prove in court, but everybody knew what went on and who was responsible. And they knew that Burr was of questionable reputation. He ultimately tried to move west to get away from that terrible reputation and set up an empire in the West, and was ultimately arrested, tried for treason. Now, whether he was ever found guilty or not, I don't know. If there's a tree out there someplace that says we hanged the rascal, that would be proof positive, I think. I don't think there's such a thing. Ma'am.
Is there anything written about Mrs. Hamilton? She lost her son to a duel and she lost her husband. I mean, is there anything follow-up after?
She was a woman of broken heart, and she lived well into the 19th century, I think into the 1840s, perhaps early 1850s. You know, she was a wealthy woman in her own right. Her father was one of the Van Rensselaers and was quite wealthy when she married Hamilton. Hamilton was just a poor clerk when they got married. Sir?
I thought they extradited Burr to Europe or something.
Why would Europe have a claim on Burr?
I don't know, that's what I thought I heard somewhere.
Burr may have gone to Europe. You know, in the early part of the 19th century, I don't think Europe's a very safe place to be. The Napoleonic Wars are going on between Britain and France and Prussia and Spain and so forth. You know, it might be a good place to stay away from.
You said no one knows what happened to Burr afterwards?
I don't know what happened to him. I don't know what happened to him after his trial.
Oh, okay.
He died in the 1830s, I do know that, but what the exact date, I don't know.
I think I read one time that somebody's take was this was ironic because both of them were sort of falling stars by the time this occurred, and probably were not going to recover. They had reached their zenith and were heading down politically and everything. Is that?
It's probably true.
It's ironic. They
I
weren't
think
stars anymore.
Hamilton, yeah, it was in his late 40s, and to you and I, we look at people in their 40s as being pretty much in their prime, but in the early part of the 19th century, being in your late 40s, that was pretty close to geezerdom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the average lifespan of an American male was about 50, so you know, he was considered an old man at the time.
And Burr was about what? How old?
I don't know when Burr was born, but I'm going to say they were very close to the same age. You know, maybe a year or two apart. Sir?
What was the basis for trying Burr for treason?
They tried to organize a land grab in the old Northwest, in the Northwest Territory. That's Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And they tried to Burr and his Confederates tried to get enough people together to put that together so that they could establish an independent society of their own and secede from the United States and so on. The Army got involved and Burr got arrested and the trial took place. The particulars I've never followed very heavily and don't really know much about, as you could probably tell. Ma'am?
Were any of those portraits of Aaron Burr or Hamilton painted during their lifetime?
I'm sure they were. Yeah, I think so. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.